I am Sherry Marlin. I'm the Executive Director of the Water Center for Systems Thinking located in Tucson, Arizona, and we welcome you from wherever you are. We are so excited to have Seth, a trained, decorated, recognized Montessori educator, a graduate of our Advanced Facilitator Training Program. And again, it's evening. We are delighted to provide resources to educators, particularly if you're here as a teacher, as a parent, as administrator, just as an interested person who wants to see the children and our future be able to think. We are really glad you're here. I am not I am an educator by training and by profession, not a Montessori educator. I can't claim that title, but have always had great admiration for the practice. And it has been very evident to me throughout my career that it is very compatible with systems thinking and the agency and that it gives to children. So again, you have made an incredible decision to be here and to learn from Seth, and we are delighted to welcome you. It will be relatively informal. There will be some time for discussion in the middle. Seth's got some polls. If you're all comfortable, we love, as part of having you as this community, cameras off, feel free to join us for conversation. And I mean, you're certainly welcome to mute your microphone so we can all hear Seth. But without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Seth. And like I said, you are in for a real treat. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Sherry. Just do one thing. There we go. Okay, screen looks okay? Great. All right, welcome everybody. I'm so excited to be here tonight for this virtual teacher studio. I understand these virtual meetings happen quite often during COVID, and so it's nice to be part of trying to bring them back. And I'm hoping this is one of many online teacher studios that we'll have in the future. My name is Seth Johnson. I teach upper elementary at Lexington Montessori School, northwest of Boston. I've taught lower elementary and upper elementary for the last 26 years, so that's grade 1 through 6. And then I'm also on the faculty of METC, the Montessori Elementary Teacher Training Collaborative that certifies teachers to work in Montessori elementary classrooms. In 2025, I completed the Advanced Facilitators credential through the Water Center as part of Cohort 8. And so I'm really passionate about, the power of systems thinking to transform the lives of students, parents, and teachers alike. So let me... Right, so our topic tonight is dancing with systems in the K-12 classroom, and just get a sense of who you are. Let me go to gallery. Maybe you could just type into the chat. Yeah, because there are things off. Type in the chat if you work in an early childhood or kindergarten classroom. I guess currently or in the past. All right, how many of you work in in maybe lower elementary? Any people that work in upper elementary, grades 4 through 6? Nice. Do we have any adolescent teachers? Nice. Higher education, middle school, awesome. And then how about admin, or do we have any parents with us tonight? Okay. All right, next, let's do a Slido poll. So this might be new for some of us. You can take your phone and you can turn on your camera and point to the QR code and then tap on the link that comes up. And that'll take you to a web page on your phone, or you can log in online through slido.com using the code. And answer this first poll on a scale of 1 to 5. How familiar are you with the idea of systems thinking? With 1 being this the first time you're hearing the term, and 5 being you studied it at MIT. Nice. All right, now let's do another one. Oops, sorry. Let's do another one. Scale 1 to 5, how familiar are you with the Montessori approach to education? With 1 being the first time you're hearing the term, and 5 being you're a Montessori trained teacher. Great. So we have a fair amount of experience with Montessori in the room. That's great. All right. Well, I'm excited to converse with you tonight about this topic that I've been interested in for a while, yet I'm still learning more about every day. And to share a bit about myself, I'll start with how I personally came to systems thinking and why I believe we need more of it in our world today. I grew up as a Montessori kid in North Texas. That's actually not me, but that is the school my mother, Scotty McIntyre Johnson, started, and where she was a Montessori teacher administrator for 25 years.
Amazing.
Here are a couple childhood photos of me. My mother always said I looked like an angel. Of course, her mental model was biased, but growing up, we really lived the philosophy of Montessori, which has a strong emphasis on peace education and the need for social justice. I was raised with the idea that we all have a unique contribution to make in the world and a responsibility to do so. And at the age of 18, I started an undergrad degree in music as a performance major playing the French horn, but shifted to the field of education due to a strong desire for social justice in the world. And during my senior year in college, an event occurred that really solidified this for me. In 1999, Columbine happened, one of the first major high school shootings to terrorize our nation. As an idealistic college kid, I was horrified, confused, and furious. In fact, I remember specifically asking the question, how in the world could the grown-ups, or how can the grown-ups in this world allow something like this to happen? And as I watched the news coverage, even at that younger age, it was clear to me that the typical short-term reactions of metal detectors, harsher punishments, and arming teachers would not solve the problem. And of course, they haven't. Since then, we've had Sandy Hook, Uvalde, Parkland, the list goes on and on. There we go. And school shootings are only one of the many intractable challenges that we face as a society with no agreed upon long-term solutions in sight. We also have climate change, income inequality, race and gender bias, and screaming at us in the headlines today, political unrest. Now, during the time of Columbine, I had been taking classes in child development and reading about Montessori's ideas of peace education. So I committed to becoming a Montessori teacher and enrolled in a master's in education at Baylor University. And while there, I took a course called Contemporary Models of Education. We covered the traditional behaviorist model based on Skinner's philosophy, and we looked at the constructivist approach based on Piaget and Vygotsky's developmental psychologies. And towards the end of the course, the professor said that we would learn about a newer approach that had great potential for the education world, but it was still too early to tell. And that approach was called systems thinking. We read 2 books, Leadership in the New Science by Margaret Wheatley, with lessons for the business world from the perspective of quantum physics, and The Fifth Discipline by Peter Senge, a business management book about creating learning organizations in which the fifth discipline is systems thinking. To my great disappointment, we didn't discuss any educational models based on the ideas, but I was reading about Montessori at the time and I immediately saw the parallels. Like systems thinking, Montessori can mean a lot of different things to different people, but I've come to view Montessori as one example of an ecological approach to education in the following ways. We have what we call a prepared environment with materials based on the developmental needs of students. Kids make autonomous choices within this prepared environment during an uninterrupted work cycle. And we have a diverse multi-age community of learners, typically 3-year age spans together in the same classroom. So Children's House is 3 to 6, lower elementary is 6 to 9-year-olds, upper elementary where I teach is 9 to 12. Some schools like mine at Almus have toddler and middle schools, and there are a scattering of Montessori high schools around the US. For me, learning about systems thinking also drove home the point that to make change in the world requires a shift in perspective. As Einstein said, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. To address challenges in the short and especially the long term, we have to change our mindset to change the system. Or, as John Lennon said in our opening number, you say you want a revolution, you better free your mind instead. So, since grad school, I've dabbled in systems thinking off and on over the years. Here's a behavior over time graph of my systems journey, an activity I strongly recommend for you to do as a reflection for yourself if you have experience with systems thinking. I did a few presentations for the American Montessori Society on topics related to systems thinking like self-regulation, ecological literacy, and supporting students with autonomy in the classroom. But I first learned about the Water Center from Linda Booth Sweeney, who we'll hear from later tonight. And then COVID hit. There was a long time delay, but eventually I did read the habits forming guide from the Water Center Explored Thinking Tools Studio. And then 2025, last year, I was thrilled to complete an advanced facilitator's credential through the Water Center. So for the past 2 years, I've been working in earnest to integrate systems thinking lessons and tools into my Montessori practice. And tonight I'm excited to share a few things that I've been trying out. I'm also excited to hear about your experiences with systems thinking in education. So hopefully this can be, a conversation that can also be continued in future teacher studios. So goals for today are, first, to develop your own personal systems literacy, especially if this topic is new for you. I hope you leave seeing the world in a new way with a general sense of what systems thinking is all about. Second, I'll share classroom applications of systems thinking concepts and tools from a Montessori-inspired perspective, including impressionistic lessons and follow-up ideas. And then finally, I'll send you off with a systems thinking toolkit that I've put together primarily for Montessori teachers, but open to everyone for future learning and exploration. I've presented a Montessori with the aim of spreading the gospel far and wide within this community. And so this Google Toolkit is part of that effort. There's a link at the end of the handout, which is posted in the chat. And as I go through the slides, look for a light bulb icon in the top right-hand corner that indicates a mini lesson idea that's found in the toolkit. Due to time, this will be more of a forest versus a trees approach, or rather looking at the whole iceberg versus just the tip. But there is a link to this presently in the handout, so you can revisit these slides as often as you want. No need for copious notes.
Mhm.
So one of the key goals in Montessori education is to strike the imagination of the child through what we call impressionistic lessons. As part of their systems education, students do need background on info on what systems are. And so I've put together several key Montessori style lessons and materials related to what is a system, classification and analysis, and special characteristics. When introducing this topic, I always tell students that systems thinking is not a new idea. Indigenous cultures, spiritual traditions, and scientists around the world highlight the interconnected nature of creation and the universe, which literally means one turning. We humans are born natural systems thinkers, and children in particular are deeply connected to the systems around them. Like all fields, there's a lot of debate about what truly defines systems thinking, but ultimately, it's a way to understand the interconnections between one another and the world around us. I tell kids it's like a superpower. You can learn to see the world as a set of relationships versus isolated events or things. This is Linda Booth Sweeney, a systems educator and author who lives not too far from where I work in Concord, Massachusetts. She's written many books about systems thinking games and stories, all of which I would highly recommend. And she produced a couple short videos for PBS. So let's watch one that I sometimes show to older students as an overview of what are systems.
Whenever you're ready. Okay. Some people study rocks. Some people study medicine, some people study French cooking.
Oh, oui, oui.
I study systems. A system has two or more parts that interact to form a whole. Systems are everywhere, from the smallest cell to your family, to a community, to the earth. These are all systems. And things in our everyday life are a part of systems. Let's take me as an example and this pile of laundry. My daughter would be so happy to see her tie-dye. What's the difference between me and this laundry? Well, if you think about it, if you take this t-shirt out of the pile, does it change the functioning of this pile? Not really, just one less thing that I have to fold. But if I took my stomach, let's say, out of the body, that would change things, right? The stomach wouldn't work on its own, and the body would definitely not work without the stomach. But if the heart and the lungs and the nervous system and the stomach are all interacting, they produce behaviors like speed or jumping or breath. That's the difference between a system and a heap. We don't see systems walking around. There's no lines drawn between connections. We have to imagine those connections ourselves. It's the interconnection in systems that produce something greater. It's the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's like the breathtaking beauty we see in a national park, the wolves and the moose and the aspen trees and the yellow warblers, all interacting in different types of relationships that maintain ecosystem balance. We can't see the connections that are occurring, but if I understand how they interact, I understand that taking a top predator out of a system will influence the whole. When we start to imagine those connections, how this affects that, then we shift our perspective from just the pieces to patterns that form a whole. And then we're starting to see the systems around us. And when we see them, then we can better understand them.
Amazing, Linda. Thanks for such a clear and comprehensive overview. For younger students, I introduced the idea of systems as an impressionistic grammar lesson right after learning about nouns. So in Montessori, we use a black pyramid or a triangle to represent that a noun is a person, place, thing, or idea. It's a pyramid because nouns are some of the oldest words in our language, and it's black like coal, which takes millions of years of decaying plants and animals to form. As a follow-up presentation the very next week, we can teach that a noun is also a system. So like Linda, I start with a pile of rags on the rug and tell students that this is a heap. If I remove a part, it doesn't change its fundamental nature. This clock on the rug, however, is a system. If I remove a part, one of the hands, a number, one of the gears, it would no longer be a functioning clock. Or our class pet Ella is also a system. If I remove her carapace, her limbs, or one of her eyes, poor Ella would no longer be the same turtle that she was. As an extension, I then continue with a small group sorting game using cut up pictures on the rug called Heap or System. So you can unmute yourself and let's try this together. So we already said that this pile of rags would be a heap and this clock would be a system. What do you think about a pile of nuts and bolts?
Heap. Heap.
Heap. What about this organized closet?
That looks like a system.
Yeah, a little bit ambiguous, right? You could argue you could take out one of the shirts or one of the pillows. It wouldn't really change the nature of the closet. But if you took away one of the legs or, one of the brackets inside, the whole thing would fall apart. What about a pile of logs?
Heap.
What about this doghouse and Fido?
Fido is a system.
System.
Yeah, both systems. What about a crowd of people?
System. System.
Yeah, this one's a little ambiguous. Some kids will say, if they're just there randomly waiting for the bus stop, they're a heap of people. But if they're there for an organized purpose, like a protest, then they're a system. The World Cup women's soccer team.
System.
Definitely a system. A pile of letters.
Heap.
A heap. You could argue that the game Scrabble is a system, of course. But once we put those letters into a sentence, then we have a system. So in addition to teaching what a system is, kids can learn to classify systems into different types. The idea of living and non-living starts in children's house or early childhood. And in elementary, we can add more complex systems like eco, social, and symbolic. Montessorians use three-part cards with pictures, labels, and definitions to introduce vocabulary. And in the toolkit, I've included a set to introduce a simple taxonomy to introduce individuals and small groups to these different types. We can then do more sorting work with pictures, and kids will notice that there's not only different types, but also connections between the types. For example, you really could classify an ecosystem and a social system as living systems because they're made up of living organisms. An ecosystem includes both living and non-living entities. And then a symbolic system is a non-living system, but it comes out of a social system. So kids delight in seeing these connections. I've also made a series of task cards for analyzing the parts of different systems, like this non-living example for parts of a book. Kids can use a magnetic board like this one to create mind maps, or they can go right to pencil paper and create a book of systems. Here's an example that one of my sixth graders did this year. We're doing a series on, or a unit on Spaceship Earth, talking about ecology. And so one of our lessons was about systems thinking. So here's his diagram of a book at the center with the parts of cover, spine, and pages. The pages include both words, which have letters and punctuation, as well as numbers. For a living system, he chose to do a human face with mouth, eyes, nose, and I like how the ears are made up of drums and wax. For ecosystem, he chose to do his backyard, an interesting choice. He's got a ramp, a table made of metal. He has a gate that includes a door and a lock, and he has a basketball hoop with a hoop, a rim, and a backboard. Caleb is an Orioles fanatic, and so he showed that, Camden Yards is where they play, which is made up of seats and the Jumbotron, very important. And then the Orioles are made up of players and managers, both of which require contracts, to play for the team. And then for a symbolic system, he did a math equation. He talked about PEMDAS, the order of operations, that it would have an equal sign, and it might include fractions with a numerator and a denominator. So when kids do these types of activities, it's really interesting to see their perspective and, what they value and what's important to them. After students are familiar with a variety of systems, we can teach that systems also have special characteristics. And two key ones are, in a system, every whole is a part and every part is a whole. And the structure of a system generates its pattern of behavior. So, for example, this tree is made up of parts, its branches, its trunk, its extensive underground root network. It's also a part of the larger forest ecosystem. And in terms of structure generating behavior, both the DNA of its cells as well as the local ecosystem it finds itself in determines its growth pattern and its evolution. Another key idea in Montessori is moving from the concrete to the abstract. So to represent nested systems concretely, I've had kids label them using concentric circles. For example, if we're studying the external parts or the body functions of fish, we can also examine the context in which they live. So a group of fish is called a school. Schools are found in a pond, and a pond might be part of a larger forest ecosystem. When studying astronomy, I use Russian nesting dolls for a lesson on our cosmic neighborhood to answer the question, where do we live? So we lay out cards and dolls for different levels, from our school in Lexington, Massachusetts, to our Earth, which is part of the solar system and Milky Way galaxy. And that is part of the Virgo supercluster, and at the outer reaches, the observable universe. Towers are another concrete way to represent nested systems. Washika is a Monastery Materials company that makes these beautiful cosmic towers going from the Milky Way at the base to the child and energy at the top. When teaching human biology, I use a Monastery material from the Schultenshaus early childhood classroom called the Pink Tower, and I label it with sticky notes to explore nested systems in the body. So our human body is made up of body systems, which are made up of organs, which are made up of tissues. Tissues are made up of the same kinds of cells, which are made up of organelles and atoms. And atoms are made up of subatomic particles, which are made up of quarks. And at the frontiers of theoretical physics is the idea of string theory, that vibrating packets of energy actually produce different types of quarks. Some of you may have seen the Powers of 10 video. There are updated versions to the 1977 original. And there's a fun website listed in your handout called Scale of the Universe that's more interactive. Kids can zoom in and out based on the powers of 10. So it's a nice math connection. We can make system structure concrete for kids using familiar toys that behave in different ways. For example, a slinky is a flexible coil wire that allows it to snake downstairs, while a yo-yo has a string wrapped around an axle that allows it to move up and down. Rube Goldberg machines are fun ways to experience a system structure generating the behavior of a marble. A couple simple games are Mousetrap, which some of us might remember from our childhood. And there are many variations of Marble Run. Here are a couple action shots of some small groups of my students that are experiencing system structure. We can also explore the characteristics of living systems, perhaps as part of biology or ecology. Living systems are fascinating because they're self-organizing and they embody certain principles. This framework comes from the Center for Eco-Literacy in Berkeley, California, and I just love the icons. But they represent that living systems are structured as networks rather than hierarchies. As we said before, our world is made up of nested systems. These systems sustain themselves through cycles, water cycle, carbon cycle, life cycle, and they need the flow of energy to survive. So for ourselves, we have to eat and excrete to survive. Unlike non-living systems, organisms constantly grow and change through development, and they maintain a dynamic balance or an equilibrium that is not static. And in the toolkit is a nomenclature with summaries of these principles based on the work by the Center for Eco-Literacy. Now, if there's one shift I believe educators need to make, and we'll get a bit philosophical here, it's to start viewing our K-12 classroom as a living system rather than a factory, because they are social systems that embody these 6 principles of self-organization. Whether conventional, progressive, Waldorf, or Montessori, our classrooms are structured as a network of interdependent nested systems, including non-living objects like desks and learning materials, as well as autonomous yet interconnected human beings, students, teachers, administrators, and parents. Our classrooms involve cycles of work and spiraling curricula. Monastery classrooms have an uninterrupted work cycle, and all schools have lessons and assigned follow-up work that leads to new learning and more complex lessons. Information and a sense of community flow through our classrooms, sustaining them just as energy flows through an ecosystem. Our classrooms change and develop over time as new curriculum units are introduced or as students and teachers bring in new ideas and projects. Our environments are adapted to meet the needs of the moment. And finally, there's always a dynamic balance, a controlled chaos that ebbs and flows, characterizing the life of the classroom. So those are some of the ways I've introduced the concept of systems to my elementary students using Montessori methods and materials. I'll share some more examples of systems thinking tools in the wild later. But first, I'd like to open up to conversation. I'm curious to hear, have you ever introduced students to the idea of systems? What worked and what didn't? Or what questions, ideas, or thoughts do you have about the content that's been presented so far? And you can click over to the gallery if you're not in there right now. And you can unmute your video too during the conversation.
So I appreciate all of these tools and I'm excited for when I get back into the classroom to start these. I guess one of the questions is, do you have any more, maybe not research, but side by side comparisons of like Montessori and systems thinking and like where we can start to draw those comparisons? Because I think my question just comes from that I don't know too much about Montessori education. I know I hope to put my daughter in one very soon. But yeah, I just like to know a little bit more of the parallels.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. As I said before, I sort of see Montessori as an ecological approach. We do have this idea of the prepared environment um, as one of the foundational principles of Montessori education. So we have, different learning centers set up with shelves with different types of materials. And then during the work cycle, kids are actually choosing works off of the shelves in the 3 to 6, for example. They might be doing it at a table or on a rug. And then they work with that material. And then when they finished it, then they put it back on the shelf for the next person to use. And then they choose another work and repeat that work cycle over and over and over. So the work cycle is one example of, cycles in action in a Montessori classroom that sort of relates to systems.
I think it's also true. See if I can get my picture up here. um, that the teacher, the adult in the classroom, isn't as central to everything as they might be in a more traditional classroom. So we believe that the environment is teaching, the children are teaching one another, and the daily experience isn't something that you can necessarily script. And so that makes it feel more, to me, more holistic, that I'm immersed in part of something bigger than me.
Yeah. So it's definitely structured as, I also think of it as an ecosystem of learning instead of a factory. There's this idea of, instead of being the sage on the stage, being the guide on the side. So Montessori, especially at the elementary and middle school level, we're always giving, first period direct instruction every day. It's usually in small groups, sometimes large groups. But then during work time, kids are choosing work independently. In elementary, they have a work plan or a work journal that they're using to kind of structure their choices. And in my classroom, we also have an assignment board with the weekly assignments that are posted, and so that's kind of helping them make choices within the prepared environment. Any other ways that you've taught systems or connections that you see between lessons you've given in systems? All right, we can continue, and then we'll open up for questions at the end again, too. Thank you, everybody. All right, so as we've seen, systems thinking allows us and our students to view the world in a new way. It's a mindset and a way of being, but systems thinking is also a modern field of study, often referred to as system dynamics. My introduction to this field came through this guidebook published by the Water Center, which offers a comprehensive curriculum of sorts in a remarkably colorful and user-friendly way. It includes the 14 habits of systems thinkers, as well as 6 tools that connect to the habits. So in our remaining time, let me show you a few ways that I've worked these into my Montessori practice. As I mentioned before, a key concept in Montessori education is the idea of the prepared environment. We have shelves for everything: math, grammar, language, history, geography, you name it. So this year, to make the habits and tools more accessible to both me and my students, I set up a system shelf with concrete or printed out versions of the habits and the tools. This is a work in progress, but let me give you a brief guided tour of where it stands now, and then I'll give you some more details on a few of the tools after. So on the top shelf, I have laminated printouts of the 14 Habits cards produced by the Water Center. If you aren't familiar with these are impressionistic and seek to capture the essence of a habit in a visual way. Another point of interest is that the eyes are left out on purpose on these charts, with the idea that you're looking at the system from your own perspective. I also include rotate-in systems curiosities like puzzles or interesting objects for spontaneous exploration during work time. Here we have the classified nomenclature materials that we saw before, as well as the task cards for creating mind maps of different types of systems. Here's my pink tower with stickies to identify different layers of nested systems. And on the far right, I have a classified nomenclature for the 6 principles of ecology or living systems, along with a houseplant that is looking a bit sad at the moment. Montessori shelves are typically arranged from concrete to abstract and simple to complex, moving from the left to the right and the top to the bottom. So on the second shelf, I have the Water Center deck of cards for the 14 habits. You can purchase one of these for about $10, which is a steal. I have students do a a habit sort with these cards as a follow-up activity, and they group them according to strengths, challenges, and questions. To the right is a work for matching the names of the habits to their pictures. And I have a laminated printout of the Iceberg tool, which we'll look at more in a moment, and a master for creating a 3D iceberg. On the third shelf, I have copies of foldable behavior over time graphs, or BOTGs, which I'll also show you in a second. For a concrete connection circle, I use a Venn diagram circle, colored popsicle sticks, and index cards to show causal links between variables. And on the right is a laminated stock flow map with a box that's now filled with cutouts of arrows and circles for connectors that can be manipulated, placed, and labeled. And then finally on the bottom shelf, I have a box of systems for creating hands-on representations of causal loop diagrams. This includes reinforcing and balancing loops. To the right, I have printouts of the archetype posters. These can be taken off as a reference when they're needed. They're sort of advanced patterns, system stories that are causal loop diagrams that occur often in our world. And then bottom right, I have the ladder of inference. I have some wooden boards that I use to build a concrete ladder, as well as scenario cards that we can use to examine stereotypes and biases. So here's a couple photos of the system shelf in action. There's a couple girls that are exploring a magnetic 30-second timer. It has iron filings inside instead of sand. So that was a systems curiosity that I put out at one point. This was kind of cool. We did an outdoor ed lesson and where we did a hike of the campus, and students were asked to make a personal map of LMS. They got to choose the scope and the detail that they wanted to put into the map. But at one point I look over and some of the students have taken off my nested systems pink tower and they were using it to make different size squares. So fortunately, they didn't take off my sticky notes. Now, in terms of further classroom applications of the tools, my favorite is the Iceberg. It's powerful because it's not only a tool, but also a framework that includes all of the tools, which you'll see here. And it's also a theory of how to change systems. In January, I do a lesson with our 4th years on the Iceberg when they're setting new goals for the year. Again, in Montessori, we strive to strike the imagination by starting lessons with an impression. So I begin by placing an ice cube in a glass and ask for observations. They notice it floats on top. Then I share a dramatic illustration of an iceberg in water. And then I share the iceberg model for problem solving. We do an example together that all students and teachers experience from time to time in my classroom, and that's not being ready for Friday's Lit Circle discussions, typically because we run out of time to do the reading or we leave our folder at home. So these are Moni's notes. For the event, she said, I forgot my Lit Circle folder. The pattern is she's not been putting in her backpack the night before. And in terms of changing the structure to change the pattern, she thought she could do her reading before watching television, so she's more likely to put it in her backpack. And to hold this structure in place, her mental model is she needs to have good self-motivation. This is not a spelling lesson, but kids also do did one for a personal goal. So Kit's was that sometimes she forgets to empty the dishwasher at home, and this is because she's rereading Harry Potter. And so in terms of changing the structure, she thought she could do her chores before reading. Or I thought this was creative. She said, I could listen to Harry Potter on audiobook while I'm doing my chores. And she does have a mental model to hold this structure in place that it's important to contribute to her family. So those were examples from a lesson that I gave. But again, because I have this system shelf, it also allows for spontaneous use of the tools. So I was doing a mini conference with a fifth year, Kayla, at one point just a few weeks ago, and she also wanted to get better at Lit Circle readiness. And so I was able to pull the model off the shelf, and we used sticky notes to problem solve her routines. Another tool that's highly relevant to me is behavior over time graphs, or BOTGs, because one of the key responsibility of a Montessori teacher is to observe during the work cycle. Change can be concrete and objective, like the growth of a child, or it could be more abstract and subjective, like observing the level of a child's independence. For an impressionistic introduction, I use the balloon dynamics activity from the Water Center. If you haven't done this before, you simply blow up a balloon and kids graph the rise and the fall of the amount of air in the balloon. They then tell the story of their graph and they can label the causes of change. So I did this recently with my fourth years, and I used this foldable worksheet from the Water Center. So here's Asmi's graph where she drew the increase in the air in the balloon as I blew it up over a few tries. And then when I let it go, she drew a spiraling line down. Kids then, cut along the dotted lines and they can flip them up. And then below that, they can see the different events or the causes of what happens. So this is Asmi's commentary. She said Seth blew and let it fly. And it actually did happen to hit Arthur, one of the students, at the end. So sorry about that, Arthur. One place in the curriculum to use BOTGs is analyzing literature. Kids can graph the rise and fall of key elements like emotions in the book Be and Me. This is not from my classroom, but an early childhood teacher used cookie sheets and magnets to make it more concrete. And they put pictures along the bottom to represent the events and the passage of time. In my upper classroom, we do Lit Circle discussions every Friday, and they come with a discussion question as well as they do one of the jobs. And so this is one that I introduced last year called System Seer. And students can choose what they want to graph in terms of a variable that's changed over a series of chapters. So in this example, Kai, we're reading I Am Malala. And so he graphed Malala's health over the course of the book. Starting off good, then she was shot tragically, ended up in the hospital, but over time started to recover. I like how at the bottom, even below low, he put death. Unfortunately, Malala did not experience that. We can also use BOTGs to observe student behavior. And interestingly, Maria Montessori did this in the early 1900s when she was observing 3 to 6-year-olds during the 3-hour work cycle. She drew what she called work curves that are illustrated in her book, Spontaneous Activity and Education. And she charted their progress related to the variables of disorder for low, a state of quiescence for mid, and purposeful work for high. Sometimes the level and the variety of work is quite advanced in our classrooms, although she noticed a dip in attention around mid-morning, followed by an even more intense period of productive work. And so she actually called this phenomenon false fatigue. She would also chart the progress of whole classes, and she noticed the same false fatigue phenomenon happening around 10 o'clock. So if you want to try this out on your own, there is a template in the toolkit to graph the rise and fall of attention. And you can go from deep concentration down to uncontrollable. You can also use a blank behavior over time graph to graph anything that you're curious about. It could be emotional regulation, yeah, time on task. And it's also a good idea to have multiple adults observe the same child with a behavior over time graph, and then you can share your perspectives with one another. Two final classroom examples. One way that I use causal loop diagrams is to make the learning cycle more explicit for students. So using materials from the shelf, or you could do this on a whiteboard, we can show how the learning process is a reinforcing feedback loop. So when we present lessons, what Montessori called the first period gift, and we offer second period follow-up for practice, and then we assess either formally or informally student learning, we're engaging in a reinforcing feedback loop that leads to student growth and increasingly complex lessons. And here's the ladder of inference, a tool to challenge stereotypes and implicit bias. Students move up and down the ladder to examine how we develop beliefs and take actions based on the information around us and the meaning that we add. So at the bottom is the information that we notice. Then we add our own cultural and personal meaning. We develop beliefs based on that meaning, and then we take action on those beliefs. So as you saw on the shelf, sometimes I use wooden boards to build the ladder, but I've also used yardsticks and rulers to make a 3D representation. And then I have scenario cards that I place out so we can, experience going up and down the ladder. For example, last year I had a student who said to a co-teacher, "You look really smart in your glasses." And so we took a moment to, examine where this belief comes from, and, came to the conclusion that it just wouldn't make sense to ask for math help only from people with poor eyesight. All right, so before our final Q&A, let me just show you the Google toolkit that I've developed. Again, primarily for Montessori teachers, but open to everyone to explore. It includes 2 Montessori-style albums with lesson plans that I created over the past year. One is to introduce general systems to students. And the lessons look like this. Might look familiar. Another is with ideas for sharing the habits and the tools in a Montessori context. So if you wanted to learn more about the 2 that I didn't touch on, connection circles or stock flow maps, that would be a place to start. I've also included Google folders in the toolkit with materials that I developed, as well as materials that are available for free from the Water Center. Also, if you want to learn more about these habits and tools, I highly recommend this guidebook, The Habit Forming Guide to Becoming a Systems Thinker. But there's also online a Thinking Tools Studio that was developed during COVID, but it remains free and accessible for everyone to access. So you just create a free account, and then you can take courses on the habits, on the tools, as well as the archetypes, which we didn't touch on tonight, but they are fascinating. And then the handout, I've listed some, there's a link to the toolkit, as well as some, books and websites that I found inspirational. And let's close with a call to action. So if you're new to systems thinking, I really encourage you to check out Thinking Tools Studio and just choose one habit or tool to focus on, either in your own life or with students over the coming month. I've found with thinking, with systems thinking, like sometimes it gets overwhelming and where do we start? And so I think if you just start somewhere, it's all interconnected and it will lead you further down your journey. So choose one that is meaningful to you and try it out. I'd also love for you to browse the toolkit and email me with ideas for additions, corrections, or if you just want a dialogue on how to implement any of the tools or habits. And why don't we close by going back to Slido, and let me ask, at this point, how familiar are you now with the idea of systems thinking? Wow, threes and fours. You don't have to be nice to me.
Good.
That's great. We have a few minutes, so if there's any other questions or anything that anyone wants to share from your own experience, either with systems thinking or with Montessori, would be great.
I have some questions.
Yes,
So in Marana, which is where I'm working right now, we have a new personal learning school. It's a high school. Literally, this next year is going to be its second year, and I'll be the instructional coach there. And I am wondering, one of the things that we're struggling with is getting students ready to engage with the type of learning that comes with a personalized learning school. And the first thing that I was thinking was systems thinking.
yes.
So I wonder if I can pick your brain and like just kind of go through how Montessori education and Waldorf education and how the systems thinking can look for a high school part of a district that is trying out a completely new model.
Yeah. Yeah, I would happy if you want to do a private Zoom at some point, I'd be happy
Yeah,
to connect with you and just brainstorm, put our heads together. My experience has been at the elementary level, but we have a middle school in our at LMS. So I've seen it done with, adolescents.
cool.
Um, there's a high school in Houston, Texas called School of the Woods, which is where I did
Okay.
my lower elementary training.
Hmm.
And they yeah, I mean, as kids get older, they use less concrete materials than they do in the younger grades, right? But I
Yeah.
think still that kind of holistic approach of thinking about their developmental needs, and having them make choices for themselves, practicing
Yeah.
autonomy, freedom with responsibility,
Exactly.
and learning how they learn is something that colleges are constantly asking for more of, right?
Yeah.
There's been a
Hmm.
huge explosion in study skills at the college level,
Oh yeah.
because many kids, go through high school just being told what to do, and then they have all this freedom when they get to college, and they're not quite sure how to handle it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's exciting that this high school is working on that.
I'm very excited. It should be interesting. I just have no idea where to start. So it would be,
Yeah,
yeah. Okay. I'll message you. Thank you so much.
definitely. Other questions about systems thinking, Montessori? Sheila,
Well,
you go ahead.
I
Sheila.
was just saying, you are welcome to stay, and I hope you will. And Sheila, I'd love to hear from you. But before people leave, I
Oh yeah.
just want to thank Seth so much from the bottom. I mean, I just love to hear teachers share, and we just appreciate your wisdom and the ideas and all of that so very, very much. So thank you for your time, and please, like, let's hang out and chat a while by all means.
Yeah, thank you, Sherry. Sheila, I was curious. Sheila is she works with me at Metsi and is a longtime Montessorian, but uh had you heard of systems thinking before, Sheila?
No, I think you were the first person to introduce it to me. I mean, maybe tangentially I might have, but this it's so applicable. But I think as somebody out of the classroom now, out of and a grandparent and someone who's looking at, you know, young children and adolescents coming up in the world, how isolated they seem to feel, and they don't feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves. They see all these tiny little pieces, I think, of humanity, and they get these messages about being a certain way without questioning them, and they feel judged. And I just think that this would, beyond the application in a Montessori classroom, would be just a better way towards mental health for, and maybe not just for young people, but to see that, we all are part of something and we're integral to it.
Yeah, for me, just, one thing is, yeah, as you get into systems thinking, it just makes those interconnections very explicit, right? And you start to see the world as a collection of systems instead of things and separated events, right? I think we are, like you said, we're really missing that in our culture, just this idea of connection and interconnectedness. Um, and so, yeah, the more of it we can have in our schools, the better. Welcome, Rose. Did you have a question or comment or observation?
Hi, I think this is my second training with you. I did the assistant training thingy back in the fall. So nice to see you again, Seth.
Very cool. Nice. With
Yeah.
Elizabeth.
Yes, with
Cool.
Elizabeth.
Wonderful. Nice. Yeah, Elizabeth in that assistant training talked about systems some, right? She was told the story about spider webs and how the structure of the fencing around her property changed the nature of the spider webs. Um,
Totally. I like this. What's funny, I took a project management class a few years ago, like a little certification. So I'm familiar with systems more because like my husband's an engineer.
yeah,
So I feel like this was looking at it in a different way than I've heard. Like I was expecting to see and hear some familiar things, and this was totally different, but also valuable.
yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, systems dynamics, as a field actually comes out of MIT. There's a guy, Jay Forrester, who sort of developed, and there's a system dynamics group that continues to this day, and they use really complex causal loop diagrams and stock flow maps to look at political systems or economic systems or environmental systems. So engineers definitely do work with this type of thinking quite a bit.
My wireless lamp died, so I'm here in the dark, but yes.
Great.
I'm so sorry. It doesn't say your name. It just says Water Center Events, but I have a question for you.
Sure, I'm Sherry. I should have changed that. Sorry, Rose. Yeah.
Sherry, no, you're good. I thought it was like a something. Okay. What ways are there for people to get involved with what you guys do? Like to volunteer or like work with you guys or get training, all of it.
Yeah, so we would love to help in any way. And if you go, I did put links in chat as um Seth was talking that are some of our free resources. We do some short, like 1 day classes. They're not ideal for educators specifically because they do tend to be workday courses. Ayana, you took one. I mean, you could speak to the intro class.
Yeah, it was
I did
wonderful.
one. I did one last week that was just 3 hours on accumulations, and we just told accumulation stories. And I went to an early childhood literacy breakfast this morning, and I got this new book called More or Less. And again, it's just a picture book of, so we really emphasized how the tools and that particular tool, which can be a tough one for people because it is the core fundamental modeling tool, and how it's just a story. So again, we have a open studio the first Thursday of every month. That's completely free, and you're welcome to register. But again, it's work day, 9 o'clock Pacific, noon Eastern. Sometimes people can sneak in on lunch or get some coverage for that. And that's everything from December was industrial safety in copper mines, with systems thinking approach to evaluation to education. But most of us have been educators. I was a classroom teacher, building principal, district curriculum person. So and if you click the make an appointment, it'll be with me. And I mean, I'm very happy to talk. And again, Ayana, like we need to connect towards you're just up the road. So before you start, like we'll do a one-on-one, I'll come out and we'll chat. So we're here to deliver benefit in any way that we can. We have those, workshops online, but then we also do customized work. I mean, that tends to be the bulk of our paid work, and then we have resources. So, this will go up on our YouTube channel. We have one from several years ago, a teacher from Milwaukee who talks about math discourse specifically in systems
Oh,
thinking.
cool.
We worked in some um, Head Start programs in rural Kentucky with funding from the Kellogg Foundation. Many of those videos are on our YouTube channel. So there are definitely, we put up as many free resources as we can. So thank you for letting me give that plug. And did that answer your question, Rose?
Totally, that's so helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, everything I've done with the water center has just been top-notch, high quality. And I really do appreciate the amount of free resources they provide people, in addition to very reasonable paid workshops. Um,
So,
and
and also I appreciate Seth's plug for the habit forming guide to being a systems thinker. And I'm actually the Sherry on the cover of that one. But that said, in every chapter in that book is on the think. I'd love for you to buy the book. People like a book. I get that. But every chapter is on the Thinking Tool Studio for free. So again, the resources are there, particularly for educators.
and as I mentioned, exploring the Thinking Tool Studio, a few years ago was what inspired me to then do the advanced facilitator credential because I was just so blown away with the quality of the tools.
And Ayana, while we did not write them specifically for high school, so there's no like high school athletics, or we also were very conscientious that there's nothing inappropriate for high school students. So there is one about buying a house and housing interest, but that's not a horrible thing for high school. There's some how you go to a meeting, how does it feel? Student council meeting. So that there's a couple parent examples. But again, nothing that would be inappropriate that kids can relate to it from how do I work my bear? So there's nothing on there that's inappropriate for high school if as part of their personalized learning, that's something they want to explore.
Yeah. Okay, well, if there's no final questions, thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you.
How are we going to get those resources that you talked about?
Which ones are those?
You said you showed us a worksheet of or a sheet of all of the different things that you're making available to us.
So
Yeah,
it's in chat, but I can share it again. It should be at the top of your chat, and that sheet you can download, Sheila. I'm going to put it in chat one more time.
But I can only download it from the chat. So I got to do it right away, right?
Right. We will not.
So download the handout. And then in that handout, there's actually towards the bottom, there's a link to the Google Toolkit.
Okay.
You can save your chat too by the three dots, like where it says looking for leverage.
Oh, really? Oh, okay. Did not know that. Save chat. Where will it go?
It'll go into your a file on your desktop, on your computer, laptop, wherever you're.
Okay.
So if you open your folders, wherever your downloads go.
Okay.
Right. Download that other handout too, just to be safe.
Okay. I think I got it.
Excellent.
Thanks.
All right. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Seth. Yeah, stay in touch, stay connected. We are here to help.
Yeah, so
Kids
my
need
emails,
this. Teachers
my
need
emails,
this.
yeah, my emails are listed on the handout. So feel free to shoot me an email at any point for further dialogue. So
Sweet. Thank you so much.
you bet. Have a good night.
Bye.
Take good care. Be well.